Welcome. It is another episode of Notes and Accords, and we are going to be focusing on the chypre. Part of this discussion will involve much interaction between me and with you viewers. So, for the live audience, I'll be communicating with you directly and asking you a lot of questions, picking your brain. We'll be doing some quizzing. It's okay to be a fragrance nerd. It's okay to want to know more than whether or not something smells good, performs well, gets you attention, gives you clout. Because there's a lot more to fragrance than what we usually hear about on social media, on TikTok, and even here on YouTube. There's much more to it. And it's great to delve into the history and into the art of it, the chemistry of it, the beauty of it, the science of it, even the mathematics of it, if you only have the curiosity for it. And some of us are just okay with wearing it and enjoying how it smells, but this is for those who want to dig a little deeper and their enthusiasm runs a little deeper. So I've already done several of these notes and accords. I've done notes and accords for leather, for amber, for tobacco, for violet and iris, for rose, and for fougères. That was the last one before my summer recess. So we're back for Chypres. We're going to be doing 3 more of these to round out the series, and that's all she wrote after that. So 3 more will be coming up. Next one for October will be herbs and spices, aka aromatics. And in November, I will be doing woods, and then the conclusion will be incense in December. So let's take a look at the chat here and see who has arrived. Hello, Philippe. Scent of the day is l'instant de galant estre. Alex, great to have you here, my friend. And you as well, Will. Tamer Al-Shamari, good to see you as well. Now then, why do you suppose that was shade? Do tell in the comments. And then we have Will back here with Astia de Villa Le Nuit. Now, I just want to make sure that people are hearing me as I'm intending to be heard. So I'm going to go into my audio. And it does look like my mic is on. So I just want to make sure that we have great audio, great visuals before we proceed with the conversation. We have 12 people who are tuned in live at the moment. If anybody else would like to chime in the chat, we'll get started talking about the chypre. Usually the first hour involves my discussing a smattering of different raw materials, whether they be natural or synthetic. And then in the second hour, I will share but just a sample of some of my chypres, which was, as you can imagine, if you were familiar enough with me, was very difficult to do. And yet still, I have probably about 35 or 40 that I set aside to chat about with you all. Mishi, great to see you. Scent of the day is Fianagi. 14 people tuned in. We'll let some more people sign on and tune into the live stream. If you're watching this archived, just be aware that some of what I say is based on a live audience. So just keep that in mind. It will still be just as enjoyable if you were to watch this as an archive, though. Just consider it a podcast style live stream. Pat Lester, hello, how are you? So the first question that I have for those who are currently tuned in, what would be the one, what you would consider to be the one indispensable ingredient in chypre? Let's hear what you have to say. Let's hear your answers in the chat. What would be the one determining material in making something a chypre? We have Philippe here. He chose labdanum. Let's hear what some others have to say. Regis Munton, hello everyone. Recently I worked Capucci Parom. I think it's a chypre. Do you know if for sure if it's a chypre? It is in the chypre structure. It is an aromatic chypre. So that does qualify. Regis Munton also mentions his choice, which is oak moss. Tamer, let me know how to properly pronounce your first name. Animalic Note is his choice. Darren Allen, hi. Darren was with us for the last effluvium, the first for the 2024-2025 season. Had a great conversation. He says, if I had to choose only one, I would say oak moss. Maybe there's two. Anybody else? How about two? How about labdanum and oak moss? Some might argue that oak moss can be replaced by patchouli and vetiver. But I would say if you had to narrow it down to just one, for me personally, it would be labdanum. There's some labdanum in this file, and I'm going to demonstrate very sticky, viscous material. There is a carnal quality to it, but also a resinous, warm, somewhat sweet, leathery. Such a dynamic material. Do you know that some who gather labdanum resin will actually brush the fur of sheep and goats, various ungulates, to remove the resinoid from their coat? Has anybody in the chat smelled raw labdanum, absolute or resinoid? Besides Darren, obviously Darren has. I'm going to show you also just a blotter. So if you wonder why certain chypres have a color, labdanum gives it sort of that color. This is not the best camera. It's an upgrade from what I used to have, but I do want to do another upgrade soon. I feel like I'm painting or using a palette, which is in a way similar to what perfume blending's like. It's sort of a dark ambery honey color, the resin itself. And it's a delightful scent. And Tamer, you say that you have smelled it in isolation. Wonderful. There's no wrong answer though. But for me personally, the labdanum just has to be there in some capacity. But there's no wrong answer. Let's put that down there. Empty Sense, great to have you joining us while you clean. Hey there, Duncan. Great to see you as well. One day you shall. It is not the most expensive material compared to some other naturals. Not the cheapest, but if you get a small sample of it, that you can refer to it for reference. And it is one of my favorite natural materials. All right, so we mentioned labdanum, but we also mentioned oak moss. Now, I've already talked about oak moss in previous notes and accords installments. What I did bring was a synthetic, which was introduced in the early 60s. This is Evernol. Why don't we try to... Lighting is not great. This is some Evernol from Perfumer Supply House. As you can see, this is in a powdered form, granular. Now, is Evernol necessarily inferior to oak moss? Or does it have some merit of its own? What do you think? I mean, I know there's plenty of us who are absolutely wild for oak moss, Auvergne Prunastri, which originally was considered for not only its scent, but for its mixed quality. But is Evernol or Orsinol or replacers of any types, do we necessarily need to frown upon them? Is it really true that as recently as 30 years ago, oak moss was used, in the majority for a mossy accord? Not really. Even in some of the most beloved Chypres, after the introduction of things like Evernol, which Evernol is the Givaudan name, Vera Moss is IFF, there would be many instances where a good amount of Evernol would be used in addition to oak moss, or even in place of oak moss. Are you catching more shade? Oak moss makes me sneeze just once on first spray. How are you spraying your oak moss? Did you purchase some oak moss and then dilute it? And if so, if you diluted it, in what concentration did you dilute it? So tell us a little bit more. Are you talking about the presence of oak moss in a fragrance is making you sneeze just once on first spray? Please elaborate. Noah, wonderful to have you here. Noah is one of our resident moderators as well, as you can see from the wrench icon. Thank you so much for being a part of this. So yes, oak moss is another one. But then there's a lot of things that are interchangeable because we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the chypre itself. Do we know why it's called chypre? It's been pronounced many different ways, and there are different ways of saying it. Depending upon the context, you may very well say chypre, as in a chypre style. The fragrance itself, the perfume itself, is a chypre. Chypre is kind of like a maybe an adjective. I've heard chypre. I've heard sheep. I've heard chypre, and I've heard chypre. It's all whatever you feel comfortable with, I suppose. Doesn't matter. Not policing the way that people pronounce things. But the French, because it is a French word, it's chypre. Chypre. So that second syllable is sort of, Philippe can maybe articulate that a little bit better. It's not chypre, chypre. Yes, it's because of Cyprus. That's what it is French for, Cyprus. But why? Why is it called Cyprus? Hello, Levi. Hi, JJ and all. I'm glad to finally catch a stream and excited to learn and discuss. It is wonderful to have you here. Thank you. Thanks. I'm getting there. I've been practicing. Thanks, Philippe. So it's called chypre because, not necessarily because it originated from the island of Cyprus, but it is supposed to evoke the exoticism of the Mediterranean. And many of the material, a number of the materials, like labdanum is grown, cistus labdanum is grown in the Mediterranean. Some of the herbs along the coast. Oak moss has been collected on oak trees in the Mediterranean. So that's where it originates from. An exotic Mediterranean sort of style. So chypres, by name, had been around since the late 19th century. However, there is one chypre that has the structure as we know it today, with the bergamot and the citrus at the top. Fill in the blank in the middle. Usually it is aromatics and florals. And then in the base, the labdanum, the oak moss, and some other fixations. And who could name what that first chypre to have what would become the chypre style? What was that first one? It wasn't the first one named chypre, but it was the first one to put together to have that style that would lead the way to what the chypre genre would be after its release. Chypre Royale, the first fragrance in this family. It was one that was named chypre, but for specifically what would become the scaffolding for chypre, what the elements were, that wasn't the one. Bingo. And this has been debated because of the name chypre. There were chypres before Cotis, even eau de chypre from Guerlain, which was in the 1890s. But it was Cotis chypre that put the chypre on the map. It's what defined what a chypre would be throughout the early to mid-century, and then it would evolve, and you'd have different styles that would delineate from that, all the way into the 90s with your fresh, light chypres like CK1 even. So here it is. It may not be an older version, but here it is, Cotis chypre. This is why I want to have a better camera, so there will be a better focus, because this is not a very good focus for this camera. So I promise next year or even sooner. Why not? We'll get a better camera that will do some focus. That's not cutting it. But that's it. That's Coty Chypre. This is the 80s version. In the 1980s, they re-released some of their seminal classics in these bottles, and it really is not too shabby at all. It's quite lovely. Um, and from having a sample of a vintage, knowing full well and keeping in mind, um, keeping in mind that the vintages are going to have some deterioration, other than, you know, notwithstanding that deterioration, I found that they weren't too dissimilar actually. So this isn't bad to have in your collection if you can find an affordable bottle. So it's Coty Chypre. So I'm hearing my music coming out of my laptop, which is not what usually is the case. Do I have good sound quality when I speak? If somebody could confirm that with me, does it sound like it's coming from my nice Rode microphone? Because I feel like it would be a waste to do this whole live stream and have it coming through just the speaker on my laptop. Just if somebody can confirm if the sound is good. Speaking is good. Wonderful. It sounds like a good quality, not a I'm talking through a microphone on my laptop. Perfect. Just interestingly enough, the music that I'm playing for this stream is coming out of the laptop, which when I used to have my Yeti, my previous microphone, it wouldn't do that. So I was a little concerned that my mic wasn't picking me up, but it was just the internal one that was picking it up. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, great. I don't want the background music to be too distracting, but I figure it's a nice touch. Anybody finds it to be distracting or they'd like me to turn it off, just let me know. Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm loving the feedback. People are receptive. Lab Dan Minimum was created from some guy named Dan who wanted to cut corners. Are you talking about Lab Danum? Yeah, I heard Lab Danum a lot. I'm not going to be one of those and correct people all the time. I was just watching some sort of YouTube news channel, and they were using the word less when referring to things that you can count. So they were saying less people, and I kept thinking to myself, fewer people. It's you use less for things that you can't count, like less water. It was driving me crazy, but hey, you gotta pick your battles. I don't want to be one of those types. Thank you, Pascal. I'm gonna say that. I think that's what it's supposed to be. Is it Pascal 10 or Pascal 10? You sound great. First time tuning in, and you sound great. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. We have 25 people who are tuned in. Let's continue this discussion on Chypres. So we already covered that the Chypre is a name of a family or a concept of perfumes that are characterized by an accord composed of citrus top notes, a middle that could be floral or aromatic, and then you move into the cistus labdanum. We're going to talk about actually some differences within the cistus labdanum plant as well with materials. And then there's the mossy, the animalic. Somebody did mention animal notes, and often the animalic notes are there, and they can be of animal or vegetal origin. And then the base notes from the oak moss, that fixative from the oak moss or the Evernoel or some sort of accord built thereof. And then the Chypre perfumes fall into these numerous classes according to all of these different modifier notes. So we'll talk a little bit about modifiers too, because the modifiers may not necessarily be the center stage. They're more sort of the underpinning. And there's a lot of flexibility and there's a lot of overlapping too. You can have Chypres that are ambery. You can have Chypres that are fougere-like. You could have Chypres that that go in all different directions. I mean, you can think about the different categories like the leather chypre, floral chypre, fruity chypre, green chypre, woody chypre, and then, as I was mentioning, the fresh chypre, which we would, which would probably be one of the most modern ones that we have. So I'm going to take a look at the other materials. We've already chatted about the two that form the crux, the labdanum, the oak moss, but we have some other things as well that are important to mention. Here are the musks that form the bedrock, the phone, as they say in French, FOND. Here's one that is still, as far as I last was aware, is one of the few nitromusks that can be used in small quantities. This may have changed. Darren, I'm not up on IFRA limitations anymore because I haven't blended in quite a long time. But I have a fair amount of musk ketone here. Musk ketone. And musk ketone comes in crystals. And you can't really get much of an idea by smelling the crystals because the crystals must be dissolved in a solvent. And musk ketone is one of the only ones that, like I said, can still be used in perfumery, although it's very restricted. And it belongs to the nitromusks. So there's also things like musk xylene and musk ambrette, which these days there are certain replacers that have been formulated because they are now banned. It is one of the first types of synthetic musks to be discovered. It has since been replaced by the newer versions of musk aromas that can be found used in larger amounts. Your polycyclic musks, your macrocyclic musks, your tricyclic? There's tricyclic musks as well, if I recall. So it's restricted. Last time I did notes on it, it was could only be used at 1.4% or less. But Darren, if you could verify if that's the same, if that has changed. And these nitro musks are really what lent some magic to some of the older formulations of perfumes, because they just have this alchemic aura to them. They're just very, I'm trying to find the right sort of way of describing it. They're the ones that hold it all together and really have great fixative value. And there are these somewhat animalic elements to them, short of actually using other animalics in conjunction. Musk ketone is one of my favorites, and it was used greatly in the early to mid 20th century. Number one was the first Chypres, right there in the name. One of the first that was named has the word Chypre in it and has maybe, but the first one that really put Chypre on the map, that had that labdanum and the oak moss, is Coty Chypre. Levi says, just by the way, I'm a beginner hobbyist collector on limited budget, and if anyone would have any general advice you really want to give, I would appreciate it. Thank you. Raja Fetish Farm is my favorite Chypre. One of my first was Black Platinum by Banana Republic. Has anyone tried it? It's a cheapie, but one of my favorites. And Darren is helping us out. Musk ketone is not banned or restricted. It must contain less than 0.1% musk xylene, which is sometimes found as a contaminant. Interesting. Thank you for the detail on that, Darren. I'm always glad to have you nearby to verify this information. So, of course, in addition to your nitro musks or your other types of synthetic musks, there are the animalics that can get involved, your castoreum, your civet. you could also find ambergris or ambergris in Chypres as well. I already covered a lot of those in the animalics and accord series. So when we talk about leather Chypres really came into vogue maybe in the 40s. And who can mention some of the first leather Chypres? And bonus points if you can name the perfumer who introduced some of those, or perfumers who introduced those first leather Chypres. Here I was thinking that it was like some obscure chypre from, 1890s or 1900s. Like, no, that wasn't it. It was called the chypre, and it didn't even dawn on me. It didn't even dawn on me that you were joking about Darren. Well, Darren smells like it could have been from that time, to be honest. Which is, its magic is it really does smell like one of those old world style early 19th century chypres. Wonderful creation. So getting back to leather chypres, can you name one big one? Going once, going twice, 3 times. We got 28 people tuned in. Surely somebody there can mention one of the first leather chypres. Bonus points for who proposed. I'm taking all these materials. Ding, 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 ding from Brian Platt. It was this. This is an 80s bottle of Andy de Robert Piguet. And who composed it? One of the first, but I've seen some others that could have predated it, actually, if we're going to splice hairs on what constitutes a chypre. None of them are bad answers, actually. Just gathering out, I'm just spreading out all of my materials here. Talking about this first hour, we're already getting halfway into the first hour, so I have to get a move on here. Here we go. Ah, yes, Quid de Lucy. So, Quid de Lucy does predate Andy, and that is the Quid de Lucy, which is argued to be in its own leather category, but we can also consider it to be Chypres, perhaps. There's one thing about Quid de Lucy that isn't really present in a quantity that would make it chypre, though, and that's the lab. But it's a very good guess because it's adjacent, so I wouldn't frown upon that at all. Antaeus, it's not even one of the first male marketed chypres, but that's definitely a chypre. He's among one of the first ones. Think of the 60s. Hey, Hi Cap 06. Evening, good to see you as well. 33 people tuned in. Cabochard. Oh, I wanted to give credit for I don't know if I already did, but Germancier. Germancier is the composer for Cabochard Baglet, which I just so happen to have right here. This is an Eau de Parfum version from the early 80s. Look at the texture that sort of echoes these scribbly lines, that sort of 60s mid-century design with that texturing. Oh, this camera's dreadful. I got to get a better camera for you guys. And that's my Cabochard, my Eau de Parfum version. Who composed that one? Because this would make a good segue to help out Duncan with one of the first chypres marketed to men. So who composed Cabochard? Well, we're talking. Well, there you go, Hi Cap 06. You gave the answer for one of the first men's Chypres, which is Aramis. There's my Aramis bottle. I know that I collected all of them here for discussion. This is a splash. It says it's a cologne, but it is very concentrated. This was found in a set, maybe from the 70s. The flea market. It's purchased. See, Brian got the answer correct. Good Lord, this just opens the floodgates of memories for me. Bernard Champ, Toast, Cabochard, Aramis, leather, Chypres, aromatic Chypres. Let's get back to talking about the materials though, because I'm now scrambling everything and talking about the fragrances themselves. Knitze 10, more leather, more of a leather fragrance. We could duke it out offline if you want to argue that it's cheaper, because nobody has a monopoly on what is what. But loosely speaking, the leathers were sort of a category of their own, but there was over leathers, sheepers, leather sheepers. All depends on really what that base consists of. Mike is bugging, by the way. Oh, that's no good. No good. Is that still happening? Is everything sounding okay here? Do we have a better sound here? Let me know if that sounds better. I did a little adjustment here. Chypres is dated 1914. Coty is 1917. Yeah. Chypres by Elegant, before it was called Oritze Elegant. It was a chypre that predated Coty Chypre, but it's the first. Coty Chypre is considered the first commercially successful one that heavily inspired chypres that came after. But Chypres could have been released in 1914. And if you're reading that on Fragrantica, maybe it's on the website. And Chypres, or Chypres, Puige fragrance. Thanks, Duncan. Very good, very good. Chypre Fulminaire from He Was Such a Nice Guy. All right, let's get to these materials because I'm at 7:40 now. Scent of the Day, Jockey Club by Caswell Massey. Very nice. Great to see you, AM. Very nice picture of you there. All right, let's get to these materials. So I was talking a little bit about modifiers. Modifiers include things like celery seed, these sort of sweet, earthy, herbaceous sort of materials like celery seed. I love the smell of celery seed, actually. Doesn't smell exactly like celery. There's a bit of a celery kind of vibe in it, but not exactly. It has a slightly different scent profile. And then carrot seed, which comes from the wild carrot, Daucus carota. Now, if you see those lovely wildflowers, Queen Anne's lace, summertime here in North America, you're simply seeing wild carrot. And the oil comes from that plant, carrot seed. Carrot seed is also a modifier for an iris accord. And then we have other things like mastic resin. Mastic resin is great with galbanum and green notes. Angelica seed and angelica root, bridging the green and herbaceous with the musky. A peppery quality. One of my favorite scents is the seed of the angelica root, or the oil of the angelica root. I like angelica seed as well. Angelica seed, much more of a top note, kind of runs, it's sort of in the same vicinity as celery seed and carrot seed as a modifier in a composition. And a modifier means that it sort of shapes, it accents, um, it brings out qualities and other things that are being added to. Very rarely do you see these materials have a big appearance in perfumes. But some inventive perfumers have decided to do some dosing of them to highlight the material. Now, naturally, of course, naturals are not the only modifiers. You're going to have all different kinds of synthetic modifiers. One of the famous ones is styrolyl or styrolyl acetate. And this had been used in a number of well-known chypres, particularly the green chypres. So you're talking about what would happen around the time of things like Azure and number 19, Chanel number 19, etc. And there's something about styrolyl acetate that gives this je ne sais quoi. It's intensely dry. It's very green and floral. There are aspects of that almost metallic green character that you find in gardenias or even tuberose. It's just it's a very dry top note. Oh, it's such cool stuff, though. It's almost like astringent. It makes my mouth water. But when I smell it, I immediately recognize it from a number of green floral chypres from the 60s and 70s. Lovely, lovely stuff. And then you have things like Sylviol and various sort of rooty, woody kind of materials. Think of like that wildflower kind of quality that you find in some classic chypres. As we're looking at like the 60s and 70s, think Bernard Chanteguin, aromatics elixir. So I have some Roman chamomile or chamomile oil, which I believe is the type that was used in aromatics elixir. And then we have something here called dimethyl benzyl carbinol, also somewhat chamomile-like, reminding me somewhat of like fresh elder flowers. Because a lot of these chypres I have, from what we can pick up, this reedy, wildflowery, kind of rustic vegetation kind of qualities to them that sort of weave in and out of the florals and citrus and the more traditional aromatics. Hey, just add light. Hey, my kind of topic. Good evening to you. Oh, now I'm sounding kind of muffled again. What's going on? Why don't we try to sort this out so we don't have this issue here? Give me 1 second, and I'll be right back with you folks. How's this? Did a little adjusting here. At least from my end, it sounds a lot better. So I was saying tomato leaf absolute, another green note. And what's a really big green note that I haven't, well, maybe I mentioned it briefly. Wow, tomato leaf absolutely really does smell exactly like when you crush the leaves of a tomato plant. Now, that's not happening now, right? Yes, exactly. Galbanum. And here's some galbanum oil here. And galbanum can be extracted as an oil or a very sticky resinoid. This is very similar to the labdanum, but even stickier. It's very tacky, very sticky, very thick. And the galbanum essential oil can be used for more of the top, and then the galbanum resinoid has more of a fixative value that goes into the heart. So galbanum is another Mediterranean / Middle Eastern type of plant. And we extract the oil from the stems, the leaves. And it has a very stemmy, leafy quality to it. Hello, Paragon Fragrances. Thank you very much. My thoughts on cis-3 hexanol and triplol, green. Moving towards a somewhat more modern interpretation, I'd say mid to later 20th century, we see a lot more of that. I think that cis-3 hexanol, we would start to see things with like the more realistic hyacinth kind of accords as well. I'm thinking Paco Rabanne, Metal. See, I'm mixing it all up. These are all the things that I'm going to be talking about later. There's also Giacomo Silence, which I think has a cis-3 hexanol in as well. Triplol is a tough one to work with. It's very strong stuff, but from what I know, from what I recollect when dabbling with things, used in traces, it has like a very pronounced sort of vegetal, leafy foliage kind of effect as well. Thank you very much, Levi, for the update. I just realized you have Pink Panther there. I'd love to be doing exactly what he's doing tonight because I've had a very long day. I'd love to snuggle under the blanket. Violet leaf is my favorite green note. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. He was such a nice guy. Says just got in a late 60s bottle of Shalimar EDC, maybe the best vanilla I've ever sniffed. You missed us for the amber conversation. We could get it. We were getting into Shalimar at that time. A great score though. Celery, anise, tarragon, licorice root gives me similar vibes. Makes sense. I think taxonomically speaking, they are closely related. I think all of them, if I'm not mistaken. Speaking of anise, there is anisal acetate that I have right here, which has been used in some well-known chypres. And anisal acetate, this is another modifier. This is an example of a synthetic modifier. It's not synthetic as in created in a lab. It's found in nature. It's just that synthetic production of anisal acetate. It's found in nature identical, floral, fruity oriented. It imparts the sweetness, sort of a naturalism to it, plum-like. Ooh, that's where I want to head. Plum, cherry, coumarin, powdery, anisic, lovely stuff. Let's get back to that conversation on plum because there's a couple of fruity things that I want to talk about because we have the fruity chypre. Can somebody name two? Can somebody name two chypres, two historic chypres that focus on a certain fruit as part of its core? Hey, Sean H. Levi says, I've been hearing about most of these notes and ingredients, and some of them I can guess out from the fragrances I have. I love to get more acquainted with the specific notes that are common. 32 people tuned in. Wonderful to have each and every one of you here. Got a lot of gentlemen here. We don't have too many ladies. I did see, unless I don't know your gender, a lot of you I just know from your name. Did have Mishi here earlier. I hope she's still with us. Ah, here's one of them. Esdad Ulsad says Mitsuko. And both of them actually, I'm reading it now, Mitsuko and Fam. Exactly. Okay, we'll start with Fam. Rosha Fam. This is a late 80s version of Rosha Fam. Roshas Fam. Always want to get rid of the S, even though it is there. Roshas Fam. I'll put a little bit of Roshas Fam. And what is it? What is that fruit in Fam? What is it? Tell us. Pat Lester, you just mentioned another one that features it. Diorama. What is the fruit? Mishi. And Brian, you got it as well. You got it pretty much the same time. So you get credit for that, for sure. Plummy plum plum. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Let's talk about that a little bit. So there was a base, and this is there's a great history to this base for Prunol. And I want to talk about it a little bit. I actually have my notes. I'm probably going to just read my notes off of my phone for this, since I don't have my email open. But I put aside some notes on Prunol because there's an interesting history to it. So besides Musks de Saxe, which I actually made a video for, Musks de Saxe is another base worth mentioning in regards to Chypres. I did a whole video on Musks de Saxe base. If you haven't seen that, be sure to check it out. So another famous one is the Delaire base Prunol. Prunol, it's this fantasy fruit base. It's a bit more floral than fruity, but you definitely have this sort of prune compote, stewed plum going on. It's very luscious and rich. Now, what's interesting about the Prunol base were the naturals that were used. There's one natural that I have, which is a lovely material, and it is called, it's poplar bud absolute. It comes from the poplar tree, Populus nigra. And this is part of the formula. If you can do, it would behoove you to smell some poplar buds absolute, because you'll recognize it appearing not only in perfumes but also in nature if you happen to be near a poplar tree. And there's something so pollen-like, not sneezy though, but just something so it's waxy and yellow and gives me that same texture as mimosa or cassis without it smelling necessarily like it. It's very cool stuff. So actually Frater Perfumes makes a base that's 100% faithful to the original Rudnitska formula. And it says in my notes here, poplar bud absolute is a natural plant extract rich in salicin. So it may need to be avoided by people with allergies to aspirin or salicylic acid. Isn't that interesting? Now, there was something that I read about it, and yes, this was a very interesting factoid about it. So Edmund Rudnitska created the base after his wartime discovery of casks of this rare type of methyl ionone, and was just discarded in the Delaire yard. And he took that type of methyl ionone and built Prunol out of it with all of these other materials like poplar bud and helichrysum, which is basically immortelle, absolute, baronia absolute, etc., etc. And it does mention right here, used heavily in the 1943 perfume from Chasse in the 20th century, in which we find gourmand fragrance is all the rage. Prunal SP deserves a renaissance, and I think many of us would be inclined to agree. Now, there's another well-known base that another iconic chypre, which was already mentioned, Mitsuko. Does anybody know the name of that iconic base used in Mitsuko? Oh, and by the way, I do have a very nice base that can approximate prunal, not exactly, but somewhat prunella. And trying to recall trying to recall who actually produces prunella again. It's very nice stuff. Very powerful. It's prunal. I may say, oh, Firmenich, prunella, not prunal. It's produced by Firmenich. Recommendations for plum fragrances. Go for a vintage femme, or even a newer femme. I think has something that's, I don't know if it's exactly like the prunal base, but it does have a sort of a plum accord to it. Yes, just add light. It is Persical, and Persical was used in Mitsuko. Tell you a little bit about Persical. Persical. So it wasn't first used by Mitsuko. It was actually used in Nuit de Chien in 1913 by Maurice Schaller for Paul Poiret's Les Parfums de Rosine. But more famously used 10 years later as the key peach note at 0.4% pure in Mitsuko in 1919 by Jacques Guerlain. It was also featured in Bois d'Azur by Chanel. And it's not a synonym for the undulactone gamma, which I actually have sitting here, which was marketed as aldehyde C14 peach. But it's not actually an aldehyde at all. It's not an aliphatic aldehyde. It's a lactone. So a great percentage of the Persical base actually consists of this undulactone gamma. Now, lactones in perfumery, from the name, suggest something that has a creamy, milky quality to it. And peach lactones are actually naturally in peach and give it that distinct flavor and scent. And it says here Persical is used in the same way as undulactone gamma. It can be used as a replacer. So one need not necessarily have Persical base. But there's some research. I mean, there's some resources online. Should you want to have a reproduction, I think there are those who have reproduced Persical. It's a bit sweeter, from my knowledge, than just the peach lactone itself. Have I smelled Givenchy Gentleman Only? No. I just haven't. I hadn't had an interest in it, just with all due respect. I read about it. Got an impression that it probably wouldn't be up my alley. And it's not a chypre. Tisk tisk. Ask me if I smelled a chypre, and then we're talking. Cheers. Hello, hello, hello to Prenda Latuto. Great to have you here. You look familiar. I know you, my friend. Great to have you here. Vintage designer finds know anything that comes close to the vintage Lancôme Maginois. Only other things that are quite rare. Fortunately, that's actually lined up for discussion in the next hour. We're actually going to do a very quick intermission here while I have a few sips of my beer. So we'll be right back in a moment. I think pretty much I've covered all of the materials. Oh, I just wanted to mention the distinction between labdanum and cystis when we're talking about raw extractions. I have some aged cystis absolute. Now, cystis, even though cystis labdanum is the one plant, if you have any materials that are labeled cystis, that's actually a solvent extraction of the oils that come from the stems and the leaves. And then the labdanum itself comes from the core of the plant. All right, we'll be back in a moment. All right, and we're back. Let me gear something up here. I heard fougere is like a barbershop. Some can be reminiscent of a barbershop. You should check out my Notes and Accords Fougeres episode. I did that back in June, I believe, and I talk all about fougères on there. Levi Shaner, Banana Republic's Black Platinum is called a chypre. Has anyone smelled it? It's got a psychedelic feeling to me. Very interesting. Oh, I just wanted to point out that I had some of this. This is what is called mugwort. It's otherwise known as armoise. Often when you see an Artemisia note, Artemisia is a whole family of plants, but when you see Artemisia as a note in a pyramid, it's actually referring to Artemisia vulgaris or Artemisia herba alba. And we have some of it here. And I just thought I'd mention it because it was along with some of the other herbal materials that I gathered for the conversation. And you'll immediately recognize it. It grows everywhere. It is actually like, it can be considered like a noxious weed because it grows unrelentingly, but it just smells so good. A lot of it grows here in New England. So in the second hour or so, I'm just going to be chit-chatting with you while I do some show and tell and sniff. those over there. And he was such a nice guy. I love that name. Love that handle. So what is a great chypre at a great price point, JJ? Get yourself a modern femme. A modern Rochas femme. There is a more of a spicy cuminic kind of quality to it, sort of this animalic cumin to it that I find quite satisfying. That is more pared back in earlier versions. That's more forward in the newer versions. And I think you can get that for 30, 35, if I'm not mistaken. Mitsuko, you could get the Mitsuko eau de toilette, eau de parfum. I'm partial to the eau de parfum, but I also love the parfum. This is a more of a vintage version of the parfum. I love these boxes from the late 70s to mid 80s. Love that pattern. And it's nestled in here. It's in its own box. There we go. Lovely coffret. And it opens up, and there's the little baby. It is the parfum version. I'll be sharing a review of the parfum version. Or some people say parfum. I'll be sharing that soon in a review. But yes, I don't think that... I mean, when you say affordable, you have to be more specific with me. What's your price range? How much are you willing to spend? What is your limit? What type of chypre do you have in mind? Do you want a fruity chypre? Do you want a green chypre? Do you want a leather chypre? Do you want a floral chypre? Not a classic fougere, but I was mentioning that is the fresh fougere genre that stemmed from the citrus aromatic chypre genre that we would see from the 60s into the 80s, and it would transmogrify into what would become acqua di Gio. Plenty of questions, my friend. Yes, the fresh chypre. Very nice. Chypres are the most elegant fragrances. Yes. And chypres are not... They're not easy to wrap your head around if you're used to more modern ideas of perfume, because they take some warming up to, because they're often not necessarily warm themselves. So you have to provide the warmth for them. By wearing them, you're bringing out the best qualities in them. Simply smelling them out of the bottle or on a test strip does not do any good in understanding a chypre or a classic chypre. Thank you, Levi. Thanks. I appreciate that. Yes. Fendinova, definitely check out the archives. I do plenty of others just like this. I do an amber, I do a leather, I do a tobacco, I do a fougere, I do rose, I do iris and violet. Wait, where's Rachel? Wait, where did how did I miss Rachel? Must be a lot of conversation. Oh, there. Oh, hi. Oh, very nice. Very nice. That's fine. That's fine. These can double as podcasts. You can listen in. You can watch. A chypre to my nose are heavy, mossy, and resinous, very heavy base like mosses and labdanum, but then it's very broad as far as the rest. Even though there are lighter ones, but it sounds like that's your at your preference. It's kind of my preference as well, but I love the green ones. Tom Ford's Noir de Noir has been called a chypre. What are your opinions on it for a guy? I wear it now and again. As you get to know me, I never frown on the idea of wearing a scent because you happen to be the opposite of what it's marketed to gender-wise. Like, if there's no problem with wearing it as a guy. I think that it's definitely a unisex noir de noir. There are some where I could say things lean more in one direction or the other, but I think noir de noir is perfectly fine to wear. And it was a signature scent of mine around 2008, 2009. I did a review of it recently based on my experience wearing it at that time. I no longer own it. I went through a couple bottles of it and had a lot of memories with it, but it's since moved on. But it always has a little place in my heart. So Noir de Noir, that's funny. I hadn't even really thought about the category for Noir de Noir, being that I think of it so much as sort of this rose patchouli, which I suppose, by virtue of the fact that it has that patchouli, it could be loosely considered a chypre. But it's sort of a deconstructed chypre, I guess you could say. So he was thank you. He was such a nice guy. $50 or less, floral, masculine chypre. Aramis 900 at one point was under 50, but I don't know if it is now. I have Aramis 900 here, but it has since discontinued. Older bottles are rather expensive, and now I think that these are starting to increase in price since it's been discontinued. Here's the other one that I'm going to spray because I'm just... And this is another one from perfumer Bernard Shaw. This is often compared to his other creation, the Seminole Aromatics Elixir. They're not entirely similar. I would say that they're two variations on a theme that Bernard Shaw composed. And I love both of them. I find that Aramis 900 tends to be a lot more sonorous and brighter and more diffusive. Not that Aromatics Elixir is a milk toast. It's pretty bold, beautiful. But I would say there's much more of an emphasis on the patchouli and the labdanum and the darker resins. And of course the aromatics. Aramis 900 is a bit rosier as well. But if you can find this version for $50, it's golden. It's just so nice. Expect nothing modern, though. I would not say if you're looking for something that would read as modern to today's. I don't know. I'm just rambling now, but it's not modern. But that doesn't stop me from anything at all. So. High Cap 06 says Rogue Perfume Chypre Siam is a really nice one. That nods to the vintage days. Earthy ones, yes. Miss Balmain, very nice. Hey, Joe. Good to have you tuning in. Philippe says it took me a while to understand Chypres. The chiaroscuro effect wasn't easy to wrap my head around. That's a good point. The shadows and the light can be a little dramatic for certain noses that are not used to that kind of dynamic. John H says, I'm blown away by how good some of the Aramis gentlemen's reforms are, Devin, especially. I think all of them were really well done, and it's just sad to see that they're now all obsolete. Ah, okay. Safari for Men, you mean? Or the original Safari, which is just mind-blowing to me. I think that's just spectacular, the original that was marketed to women. Well, I mean, if we're talking about that one, I guess based on the base, maybe a fruity chypre, probably. I think it's a fruity chypre. You should just try to get I'm gonna pull one of those, like the older is better, but unfortunately with a lot of the Ralph Lauren, it is the case. Try to get a bottle that is produced at least by Cosmere. The Cosmere bottles, I don't know how much they are. I'm probably leading you down a path of despair because it's probably too expensive. I was lucky to find my bottle of the original Safari in an antique shop in Western Mass for $10. So kind of spoiled. Chypres or Fupras. Fupras and Chypres. Yeah, I didn't really. I mean, I guess some of the things that I pulled aside kind of fall somewhat into that. Why don't we just start talking about the things that I have? We went through the materials. I think we did a solid job going through. Because Chypres is more sort of like it's such a broad category. So I think we're able to keep that first hour relatively succinct. As far as talking about the materials. So let's just talk about the perfumes. It is no secret to those who are very familiar with me and my taste that Bernard is one of my favorite perfumers. And he is a maestro at the Chypres. And here's one from, I believe this was released in 1968, 69, around the same time as Aramis. And it is Azure. And we have this very distinct bottle. I love how the one side of the bottle has a flattened edge. Prevents rolling, I imagine. And this is actually much more brutalist, if we're thinking sort of like an analogy with architecture. I love brutalist architecture, but it's an acquired taste. Some people want it all torn down, sadly, and I find a real sense of nostalgia and melancholy when I see brutalist architecture, because it represents such a time of promise and future, forward looking, and it was just jettisoned completely by the late 1970s. It was already considered to be passé. But I find the architecture to be beautiful, but brutal, because it's just, everything is very angular, and it's exposed concrete and very geometric. And I find that the smell of a floral green leather chypre from the 60s to have that similar feel. They're not warm and cuddly. They're not fuzzy. They very much send a message. And it would be interesting to discuss what that message is, at that time when you're thinking of the zeitgeist of the late 1960s. This is marketed to women. But then again, we take a look at its sibling, Aramis, and they were released around the same time. And when you smell each of them, and this is the thing that the whole concept of scents having a gender and smelling feminine and masculine, in the 1960s, that was sort of getting turned on its head. Because if you smell each of these, there is no clear delineation between what is smelling masculine and what is smelling feminine. In fact, I guess when we compare it to what is considered both, one or the other today, these do smell a lot more aggressive. Here we go, language and how it suggests gender roles and all that good stuff. Aggressive, a bit brusque. But here they were at the same time, released around the same time. One for men, one for women. And Bernard Chant was known for doing this. So that's a topic that I've always found fascinating, is testing the boundaries of what we can be considered conventionally masculine or feminine. And it's interesting how it also coincided with third wave feminism, women getting out to the workplace, finding independence, finding that there's more opportunities, liberation. We hear a lot of these programs and movies from the 70s where women's lib is mentioned. So we were starting to see a leveling, the playing field being leveled, a leveled playing field. So men and women were starting to smell similar. And we started to see some differences with that in the 80s. But yeah, Bernard Chant, Aramis, Agere. Do you really need to get one of these bottles now that somebody bought 50 of them, or multiple people bought 50 or 100 of them and jacked up the price everywhere else? You know who you are. And now the bottles are going for $300 or more. If you have a lot of disposable income, maybe, but you can get the newer version. The newer version is quite lovely as well. It may not be as meaty, but especially if you're sort of dipping your toes into this style of chypre, it's probably best that you don't have something that's so hardcore to begin with anyhow. But yeah, I think that the newer version of Agere, and I'm not talking about the New West version, the exorbitantly priced reimagining of it. I'm just talking about the ones that were in sort of the beveled edged rectangular bottles. Another men's chypre, Polo, original green, and then its sibling, the original Lauren by Ralph Lauren. Somebody mentioned Magie Noire. Oh, the legacy version. You're right, Philippe. That's what they're called. Yeah, very cumin forward. Interesting how they made that decision. Not that I frown on cumin at all. But let's get back to Magie Noire. Magie Noire is another one of those where it's a little sad what happened to Magie Noire. It doesn't smell. The newer bottles don't smell that bad, but they don't smell that great either. There's something about the magic that is missing. But what a bewitching, naturally bewitching, because Magie Noire, of course, black magic. This floral chypre produced by Gérard Goupy, Jean-Charles Miel, and Yves Tanguy. Heavy on the galbanum and cassis, which is also known as blackcurrant. You have those very green notes, and then it's honeyed. and it is voluptuous in the middle, voluptuous florals, but it's really that base, just really spellbinding with just this stew, this cauldron, as it were, of resins and patchouli and oak moss and woods and animalics. And another one in a similar vein would be yet another from Rochas. And let's take a look. And this is the parfum version of Rochas Mystère. Rochas Mystère. This is another one that has been discontinued. And that's absolutely heartbreaking. This is a Nicolas Mamona. That was the perfumer. Once again, it opens with that galbanum, and you have the hyacinth and the green notes and the aldehydes. Oh, look, this is the little pamphlet. And here's the bottle. And that cap is this, it's a deep garnet red lacquer cap. This is its stand. Now, this has also a revisiting of that Prunal accord as well, and violet, caraway, gardenia. And the base, it's very heavy in styrax resin. Just unreal. Yeah, this was a wonderful find. I found this on Mercari for $80, which I think is about a third or a quarter the amount that it usually goes for. So I was very lucky. And you could also, the eau de parfum I also have as well, and it's just as much of a delight. I'm going to go back into its home. Let's get back to the chat, because the chat has been very active, as I can tell, and I don't want to neglect it in case there's some questions or comments that I should be aware of. Just make sure this is very interesting. I don't know, I'm having trouble with this. Okay, we'll have to deal with that later. This. All right, put that over there. All right, let's get back to the chat. I'm very financially in deep to Cosmere. What a shame. It's just such a shame. But, not much of a clone guy, but Alexandria's rendition of Chypre Palatin is unbelievable. To be honest, I'm not crazy about Chypre Palatin. I find it to be a bit hollow. Is that bad? Like, it's nice, but I think I'm a bit spoiled, given all the Chypres that I've already smelled. And while it's decent and it does capture some of that spirit, it just seems a little too, I don't know how to describe it. It doesn't have that oomph to it. I'm at a loss for words right now. What are some designer Chypres? Well, I've been talking about a ton of designer Chypres. Sorry to give you a hard time, but I'm talking about Rochas. I'm talking about Grey Paris, Chanel, Number 19. I mean, that's a designer, right? Is that what we're still calling these designer? Chanel? I think so. Here's my eau de toilette of Chanel number 19. A little bit of ASMR action. 35 people tuned in. Thank you. Thanks to each and every one of you for tuning in for this stream. And here is the eau de toilette number 19. One of the better known green Chypres. Even this has a greenish color. They would come in a greener color by, I believe by the 80s. I'm not complaining. I love this color. I think this is an 80s bottle. It's pre-barcode. So I'm not really sure. I think the barcodes were required for perfumes by the early 90s. So, but I may be wrong. And then also a men's chypre for monsieur. This is called spray cologne, but this is one that was marketed to the U.S. in the early 90s. It's in an eau de toilette concentration though. And here's that. Lovely lemon opening. Citrus chypre. Citrus aromatic chypre. Those are designer chypres. And you don't have to get vintage versions of them. You surely do not. And moving right along. Oh, thanks, Sean, for helping me. Obviously, I'm a bit behind. Well, it's good to know that the modern version has that same sort of mystique to it that I like. That you're a little bit underwhelmed. Yeah, I was. The thing about MD's, that whole house, it just falls short for me. Like, in theory, you would think I'd be in love with it, given my taste. But everything that I've smelled, I'm like, I just can't get excited. That, or with what's the other one? The Invasion Barbar, and then all of the other ones, Amber Top Copy, and a lot of the dowdy Victorian style scents that you would think that I'd be like, oh, this is just like fabulous, and I'm just like, they don't do it for me, you know. Give me Oritza Lagon or Grossmith. A lot of those resurrected houses. Sure enough, but yeah. And I don't know. I just feel like it's just, I know I'll probably be canceled by some people, but I almost feel like the house almost tries too hard. Speak your truth. Thank you. Yeah, I don't like to censor myself, and I think at times in the past I've gotten myself in trouble for that. But I try to, I try to be as tactful as possible, because God knows there's enough people who are not tactful enough when airing their grievances. Teatro alla Scala. That is one that will knock you out. Great, a great suggestion. That's good. I'm assuming you're enjoying a good brew. For those who might be interested in what I am drinking, this is from the Greater Good Imperial Brewing Company. It is an Imperial New England India Pale Ale called Greylock. Now, notice how conspicuous that ABV is. They really wanted to make sure you knew. And here I am. And I know. It is tasty. Pat Lester says in the Fougere notes and Accord stream, I stated that lauter for men is a Fougere, but you mentioned it's probably a chypre. Is it safe to say it's a chypre in the stream? I think it is. I think it, and I think actually it is sort of like an intersection almost between, you know, it's almost like a chypre, almost. Yeah. Bellamy. And Paco Rabanne à la nuit. Yes. I was discussing that one pretty recently. I think when I had Stout on over the summer, we were talking about La Nuit de Paco Rabanne, not à la nuit, just La Nuit. Jean, oh yeah, I have that right here. This is a Jean-Louis Chypres. This is the eau de toilette version. More recent formulations of it are still knockouts. Don't worry about getting a much older version. Beautiful monolithic bottle as well. Lots of galbanum, hyacinth, Tsar. Mm-hmm. Go for it, Marcel. Do it up. Enjoy yourself. And then, you know, we have some rarities that are absolutely spectacular in their own right, but just were not commercially successful. We have things like this, another Rudnitska Dior from the 70s. Rudnitska was another maestro of the chypre. Being a little temperamental. I got this out. I have the bottle out now. There we go. I'll be doing a proper review of this pretty soon. This is Dior, and Christian Dior. Lovely, lovely stuff. Mm. And then, of course, you know, one of the early seminal chypres from Rudnitska is Miss Dior. Here's a early 90s bottle of Miss Dior. What a crazy lady this one is. Oh, I wish I could be better at describing right now, but I appreciate it. Thank you. I think my aunt wore Passion. I think she wore Passion and Poison. But to me, that is, I'd say that's a little bit more of an amber, or as what was referred to as an Oriental, or what we could call Eastern. Claire, great to see you. It's been a while. Great to have you joining us. I'm going to be on for about, maybe about 30 more minutes. Anybody a fan of Magleaf? Magleaf is another lovely one to visit when you'd like to get acquainted with the mid-century chypre. And this is one that was actually composed by Jean Carl after he lost his sense of smell. You can believe it. Which brings me to some of the chattering about how Luca Turin is not fit to smell fragrances because he's 70 or 71. What kind of ageist shit is that? Okay. You know, I suppose we should have Alberto Morillas retire. Jean-Claude Elna should never make another thing again. The things that people say. What are your thoughts on that? I don't think that there should be any age limit for somebody to create perfume or to discuss it or to write it or critique it. And anybody who uses age should know better. This is the parfum, the Magli parfum. This actually, what is very cool about this is that Jean-Carl chose to use just a soupçon of asafoetida. Asafoetida is a type of seasoning, actually, and it's an herb. It's an herbaceous plant that uses a seasoning in Eastern and Indian cuisine, and I think it's also called hing, and it's very pungent. Has a garlic-like quality to it, without the back notes of garlic. So if you wanted to avoid garlic but still have a garlicky flavor, putting a tiny bit of asafoetida would be useful. But he used a tiny bit of it in this to bring out the green green foliage qualities of top notes. Cool stuff. That's the signature green and white and gold stripe of Carven Paris. Carven. And this is a parfum de toilette. Nothing too fancy with the atomizers. I love the exposed crimp plastic nozzle atomizers of the age. It wasn't about being super flashy. The perfume spoke for itself. Now you have coffrets inside of coffrets like Russian nesting dolls. And heavy, heavy metallic caps. And then what you smell inside is so anticlimactic to all the pomp and circumstance that comes with it, right? Or am I being unfair? Yes, asafoetida, yes, just as the name suggests, quite fetid, but in that tiny trace, it just seems to do magic with these stemmy, vegetal, green, leafy top notes, going with, along with the galbanum and the resins and the citruses and the, tomato leaves and basil and all that good stuff. Oh, which one, Sean? Which was it? This one? Are we talking about the Maglif or this, the parfum or the parfum de toilette? That's right. Clear about the age question. Yeah, I mean, as if there wasn't anything else like that could cause me to lose respect for certain people. Like that's just like, come on, like grow the fuck up. I've always found Revlon's that man blurs the Fougere Chigere line. Yeah, yep. That's a fun one. I have that in my closet in the back. I didn't line that up for this evening. Find those cheap goodies. The vintage Avons are. Oh, you want to talk about getting some affordable vintage Chypres? Yeah, Avon is a good place to start, like Emprise and And Pries is one of my favorites from the 70s. And it's an Avon. Oh, no. It's just so gauche to even consider Avon amongst all of these classics, right? Come on. A lot of the Avons were just as great, just on par. And a lot of really well-known and respected perfumers were at the helm. With Avon, which my good friend Derek, aka the Scented Devil, Varanus Radari, you may know him from Base Nuts or his own YouTube channel, has spoken in great length about his reverence for Avon. And he inspired me to revisit Avon, because I was one of those people who thought that Avon was just sort of a cheap brand, which is a shame because my mother was a big fan of Avon. And I developed a newfound appreciation. Chris Montgomery, hello. How is the modern Aramis versus vintage? Of the vintage runs, what would be your recommendation to obtain? Sadly, I don't think I would be as much of a help to you because I haven't really smelled more recent versions of Aramis, but I do recall some folks in the chat were mentioning that the newer versions were quite enjoyable. And I'm sorry, Fendanova, I don't know if that was a question for me or for somebody else in the chat. If it were for me, if you could clarify what fragrance you were referring to. Ah, okay. And she had that bottle. Very cool. It does have a certain soapy quality to it. I will agree with that. That's part of its appeal, I guess, for me. French line to me is sort of, oh, sorry, Duncan. Revillon as opposed to Revlon. Revillon. I'll type it. Revillon. Ooh, no, I didn't spell it correctly, though. Oopsie poopsie. There's no M as in Mary there. Here we go. Revillon. French line to me is quite nice. I feel like it is their take on the Antaeus style. So I wouldn't necessarily say to those out there that it is necessarily central, but it's a nice variation on that style. I find that it actually has a little bit more of a robustness than Antaeus, if anyone can believe it. But yeah, I would argue that it's not as unique, but I have it, and I really do quite appreciate it. And I do think that it's underrated, given that I don't think it's very expensive compared to some of these other, highly coveted and hallowed vintages that get a lot of hype. Deluxe Lex says, as the years progress, perfumes are becoming all about the surface, presentation, top notes, then depth, the actual juice. It's another product of late-stage capitalism. Try desperately to get the attention of the consumer with anything possible to entice them and appeal to their dopamine rewards. We're in a very consumerist age, and an age of immediacy and instant gratification. So that has all the trappings of what we find today in perfume, much like we see other forms of other products for consumption similarly so. And all the choices too. The choices can be dizzying. So it's hard to figure out what really stands out when you're inundated with hundreds of different choices and they're all vying for your attention. I just find the modern market, not even some, I find gems in the rough. Like, I'm definitely not one of those types like, like the modern perfumery is garbage. Because I don't necessarily think it is. I think there's remarkable stuff being made. But it's very tough when you're in a marketplace where there's so much to distract you that it's hard for some of these great fragrances to really stand out in the noise of it all. And it's so very noisy. I just, I get a headache from it. And I can't keep track of like one new line, new house, new brand after another. You see it featured on Bass Notes and Fragrantica, and people talking about it on Instagram and TikTok as if it's the next best thing. And then what happens is I end up finding myself with samples, and this is what all the hullabaloo is all about. Like, not impressed. I'm often not really impressed. Off my soapbox again. Passionate French commentary. Please do it. I encourage you. I really appreciate your enthusiasm. And that speaks to the same sort of like, let's strike the iron while it's hot. Let's make sure that they buy this based on what it smells at the very beginning, because much like the way that social media makes it difficult for us to truly have meaningful exchanges, it's the same thing with transactional exchanges as well, you know? Let's just try to make sure to get their money as efficiently as possible. It's so cynical. It's so completely cynical. And the way that a lot of these fragrances are developed now, it would make you so depressed to think about how they're developing these through different types of marketing decisions and focus groups and people who really have no business making creative decisions, yet there they are calling the shots. And it's affecting so many different lines of business as well, you know? Film, motion pictures, music, different forms of artistic expression that's been commodified, and now the commodification is completely eclipsing and any kind of creative pulp, and just squeezing that out. Everybody wants to feel like they have meaning and purpose. I'm getting way too philosophical for this. You can obviously tell that it'll be time for me to sign off soon, unless you want me to continue rambling about this. And I think that the appeal of being a content creator or an influencer or somebody who gains who gains sort of some sort of respect for being an authority or expertise, it says a lot about where we are socially, and the fact that often people will do what they can to get that kind of attention and retain it. And of course, there's also the monetary element of it as well. What am I going to do to sustain this? If I'm going to invest this much time and energy and give up the opportunity for another full-time job, what am I going to do? What are the steps that I need to take in order to make money off of this? And there's different doors in front of that person, but what's going to make the money the most efficiently and in the easiest way possible? And I'm not saying that content creators are lazy necessarily, or influencers, but if they have found that they can capitalize on it, they might choose to do certain things that they see are proven to be effective. So, yeah. So they end up getting these promotional samples, and they'll talk about them as if they genuinely care about them. But it's not limited to. I keep saying this, though. It's not limited to perfume by any means. Like, let's not pretend that this is something that's plaguing the fragrance community. That it's just specific to what ails our own community. It's with any kind of consumer product, honestly. You know, cosmetics and clothing and supplements. It's all the same shit. It's all the same thing. All bark and no bite. Highcap says, I fully admit I was an Avon snob until I tried one. Varanus suggested black suede. Here you go. Yeah, we were mentioning Chypre #1 earlier. Darren is a formidable talent. Caraway seeds and fennel look alike. I have to get. They're called embellifers. Caraway is an embellifer. Cumin is an embellifer. Fennel is a embellifer. But they all have slightly different flavor and taste profiles. Fennel is a bit more anisic, that's for sure. Caraway and cumin are not interchangeable, and I hate when people do that. I hate how even Fragrantica will show caraway when it's supposed to be cumin and vice versa. I'll spell that for you. Bellifer. Eau d'Hermès. What a dream. All right, I have so many of these. I'm just going to, guys, I'm not going to get into too much detail about everything else that I gathered for favorite Chypres. I'm just going to show them to you and say, hey, here's another one of mine that I like, because I'm already running at 2 hours here. So we talked about a number of them already on this table, but Niki de Saint-Fa, this is from the early 80s. It's in a beautiful blue bottle. Here are the two snakes. They got a little fancier here with the nozzle, the gold nozzle. How about that? Silences from Jacquemot. Alliage. This is Alliage. This is a early 90s bottle. Still smells terrific. That reminds me of G, your hair smells terrific. Does anybody remember that shampoo? Alliage. Sport fragrance spray. Estee Lauder. Sporty green. Delicious stuff. God, love my Alliage. Love to get the parfum version of it as well. Knowing from Estee Lauder. Here's a delectable one from the early 70s. This is the first fragrance release from Loewe. This is El de Loewe. And I'll be sharing a review of this pretty soon. Another intensely green. Ooh. I'm just a big old mess here. Something just dropped. Well, anyways, here's the bottle. I feel like there's almost as much galbanum as this as in like vintage Vin Vert. And that's El de Loewe from, I believe it's 1971. Now there's an insignia at the top of the bottle, and it actually separated from the bottle. And now I'm having to look for it. It's almost like a little medallion, but it fell. There we go. I found it. A second. That's a shame. It doesn't stay stuck to the bottle, but there. There's the L for Loewe. I'll find a way to get it back on. A little bit of crazy glue won't hurt it. That's kind of cool. That was at the top of the cap, actually. All right, some others. Armani. This is an early 80s, one of those hyper Chypres, like Clitzia, Kay de Clitzia, Fendi, and then there's the Armani. These are the deep cuts, so to speak. Um, Another classic green chypre. We have this one in a box. What a funny little box with just the picture of the bottle. This is a Givon Chypres. Givenchy 3. That's the bottle there. Nice little humble bottle. Note that I'm not trying to smell each and every one of them because I don't want to get some serious nose fatigue. Coriandre from Jean Couturier. Heavy on the coriander for sure, hence the name. Coriander rose, mossy, sort of this, I don't know, it might sound like it's not appealing, but a sour quality to it. But I love it for that. It's coriander eau de toilette. This is a newer version. Newer versions still smell fantastic, but you could also get an older version like this one. Check out that malachite motif on this cap as well. So that's coriander from Jean Couturier. Hermes, of course, we need to mention in Hermes. So we have the aldehydic chypre, Kalesh. This is the eau de toilette version. Molinard had a really nice one called Chypre d'Orient. And this was discontinued some time ago. You used to be able to get this for $25. And now it's just impossible to find. Really good quality. It would rank amongst Cottiche Chypre and Mitsuko and the like. Molinard Chypre d'Orient. Here's a vintage from Mio, Crêpe de Chine. And this is the eau de toilette version. The parfum version is a classic as well. And these lovely Bakelite caps. Here's that. The Crêpe de Chine. Eau de Crêpe de Chine. Santa Maria Novella. Melegrano, Colonia, Acqua de Colonia, late 60s. And it smells like it's from the late 60s, but packs a punch. Wonderful, wonderful, soapy chypre. Like fine milled soap and florals. There's a huge obscurity. This is from Aromarie. And it is Central Chypre. This is a bottle from the 80s, I believe. This is another really spectacular one. Really in that classic style, heavy on the labdanum. Some great florals in the heart. And yes, there are some, modern Chypres that deserve recognition as well. Like this is Tantelieu Rue Cambon, Tantelieu Rue Cambon Chanel, or 31 Rue Cambon. This is the Eau de Parfum. Great iris and ylang ylang. Really pretty stuff. And one of my favorite Chypres is actually one that really stands out among the crowd for being so aggressive and earthy and woody and mossy, and that is from Olitza Legrand. That's Chypre Mousse. And this is testament to the fact that moss accords can still be made with panache even in this age where we have a restriction on the use of the oak moss absolute. One of the mossiest things I've smelled. And this is so herbaceous, and it's filled with all of these sort of like bitter, green, spicy anise qualities, even sort of like a mushroom kind of feel to it, just like aging wood, very foresty, just fantastic. One of my all-time favorites is Chypre Mousse. And the smell, they definitely use a reconstruction of a Musks base. It immediately recognized Musks in this, with that tarragon and the anise, the orange blossom. And that's, I think, all the ones that I pulled aside for the discussion. Oh, Ivoire de Beaumont. You have to mention Ivoire de Beaumont as well. We were chatting about this, Dahlia and I, on one of the live streams this past summer, our shared love for Ivoire de Beaumont. Should have called it Chypre mushroom. Nice. Oh, the Galant. Is it one of your top fives now? The pleasure is all mine. That humbles me. I guess that's what it means to be, an authentic influencer. I didn't get any kickback from Galant, that's for sure. But it's not about that for me. If I am considered a tastemaker, I think that's a really humbling sort of title, and that's very kind of you. That's very kind of you. I should ask, does anyone have recommendations for any chypres that make the central act of being a chypre a feature or support very prominent in moss and labdanum or something similar? Well, one of them is a chypre mousse, that's for sure. And yeah, it depends on if you're referring to newer releases or some of these. I mean, some of the ones that I mentioned tonight would fall squarely into that description for sure. Hey there, Zambowman or Zamboman. Great to have you tuning in. We're going to be on for not very much longer. I started here at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're running a little bit more than 2 hours now. I actually haven't, Duncan. I have not tried Poison Esprit de Parfum, to be honest with you, but I am very familiar with the classic. Very nice, Claire. I think we've talked about the Armani, Nishi. Is it evident? Is it noticeable? Should I stay on until I finish this? Well, one thing's for certain, if I am a little bit tipsy, as you say, I lose some filters, which can be a good or a bad thing, depending upon what I'm talking about. The deep cuts, yes. And to think that's not even like the extent of the chypres that I had. It was impossible for me to narrow it down. And that's just it's just crazy to think. It's just like insane to think that it's like a tiny fraction of everything I have. At least I did find out that somebody else mentioned, I think it was on Instagram, that they said, out of my 1,000 fragrances in my collection, and it felt good to know that there was somebody else completely out of their mind. And I'm trying to remember who that is. I think it was one of the hosts of On the Scent. What is her name? I'm looking her up now. Yes, Susie Nightingale. Just casually reading her comment. I have over 1,000 fragrances, and these are the 2 that I purchased. It was one of her posts on Instagram, and I felt sort of kindred to me. Rachel, which one was the cool bottle? I can bring it up again. Yes, that's the original Knowing. That's for sure. Yes, one of our early connections was through Silences. Nice. Chris Montgomery says, regarding Aramis, I would like to know which one would be considered the gold standard, seen many different bottles available spanning years. I'm just trying to get a good example of the namesake. I don't know. I don't really work in terms of gold standard, but I think that if you really want to be sure that you're smelling one that's closest to the original, just try to find a vintage version that I mean, there's some key indicators, especially if you have, if you find one with which includes the box, and you have pre allergens ingredients lists. When the ingredients list just listed benzophenone, alcohol, a handful of other things, and then even earlier than that, a shorter list of ingredients, UPC symbols, barcodes, the different designs of the bottles. There's all different ways that you could do that. I think maybe Raiders of the Lost Scent. If you look at that website, I don't know if he had done a feature on Aramis. Yeah, that's the other one that has asafoetida listed as a note, and it kind of makes sense. You really should. It really transcends the concept of a chypre, though. It is something just absolutely enchanting. It is something that if your heart lies in nature and in the outdoors, then it will really appeal to you. It isn't some sort of sleek or urbane type of Chanel kind of attitude at all. It's definitely for somebody who likes a more rustic, idyllic feeling kind of scent. Actually, Jose, I will be doing one on herbs and spices next month. So the ones that I have left, herbs and spices next month, and then the month after that, woods, and then the final one for the series in December will be on incense. Ah, okay, okay. Igner explosive. Yeah, I think it's worth a blind buy. Forget L'Arc de Gucci. I think it's better than L'Arc de Gucci. Igner explosive. That's a really good one. And I don't think you really have to worry about versions. I don't think I have like a version from like the 2000s, and it kicks ass. Yeah, the bottle is something else. Oh God, keep me away from that. It just, when I smelled that for the first time, I just felt like I was smelling like ass, like eh, like just it's just so foul. I wrote a Turin-esque review on that one, and I don't usually do those kinds of reviews, but that one was just so ghastly to me that I just had a few words on it. I think I said that Unudamum, um, if an herb garden had halitosis and a bad case of swamp ass, then it would be Unadaman. And I said something to that effect. Yeah, it's really my clause. Yeah, I think Philippe, if he's still here, he can confirm that. Clear says, oh, speaking with Levi about a cur. I don't know about the metal can. When in doubt, just get the one that's in this bottle. This one is just like a 50 mil, and it's not a. Some of them have a built-in atomizer. But this one doesn't. And you could just, if it comes to the box, you know what to do. Just check to see the details. So here we go. No filter. Miguel Matos seems like a very nice guy, but I just do not jive with his style of perfumering. I just do not. I don't. he seems like he's on some good shit when he is composing this stuff. The stuff he did for Bruno and Campora is just wretched as well. It just smells so wrong, so regretful. And it's sad because he has really good taste in fragrance as well, but there's something about his style that just does not resonate with me. We'll leave it at that. Yeah, ass. I pull no punches tonight, I guess. Poor Mika. Oh, that one's a real treat as well. I wrote a review on Africa Oliphant. I can recite it if you want. Even the Nishane that are considered like the arty ones, I just can't get with. I'm sorry. They just seem to try too hard. Hold on a second though. Let's see if I can find what here we go. So when writing about Africa Oliphant, imagine the gnarliest, most unkempt headshot possible with blacklight posters, garish hashish pipes and bongs, a rather disheveled and perhaps unbathed Tommy Chong type shop assistant, and most of all, incense. And I'm not talking about Nippon Kodo or Shoyedo incense. I mean the incense punk sticks, dyed bright colors with names like Sex and the Beach, Pussy, and of course the classic Nag Champa and Musk thrown in for good measure. So you're shocked to find a woman of refinement perusing the merchandise while wearing Le Bleu. And that begins to mingle with the head shop ambience as you ponder a lurid lava lamp. She seems to realize she's taken a wrong turn and immediately vacates, leaving her trail behind. Then imagine you smell poopy in the distance. Maybe there's a plumbing issue. Maybe there's a plumbing issue in the head shop's lavatory. Maybe Tommy's falafel wrap for lunch didn't quite, Tommy as in Tommy Chung, Tommy's falafel wrap for lunch didn't quite agree with him. This suggestion of stench is just beyond the incense and oily, questionable paraphernalia on the shelves. This is my impression of Africa Oliphant. I get the feeling this perfumer wanted to out-animalic the most animalic fragrances out there. I love a good bit of skank done right. This ain't done right. I also detect an overdose of IFF ambergris olefac base in the dry down. It wasn't intended for overdosing with globs of civet replacer and castoreum replacer. It is quite fascinating in its hideousness, though. I will keep my sample for reference. And who did that one? Don't know who this perfumer is. Jorge Lee? Don't know him. But yeah, he made Africa Oliphant. I suppose that's just one of the yeah. There's also some other bitter stuff in it too. Yeah. Totally. Like this is the thing, you know, this fetishism for like the animalic. The animalics were not meant to be front loaded, and when like these, a lot of like artisan perfumers do this too, and I think it's just bogus. It's like they don't really have respect for the animalic materials. They're more into the idea of the animalic being sort of this sort of this like talisman of some type that you have, like they put it in the center of everything else, and it's just not what they were. It's just not how they were intended for perfume, just in my humble opinion. Like, you use too much of it, it's just not gonna smell good. Like, I love animalics. I love even the most challenging. but it has to do with, you know, how they're dosed in a composition. If you're overdosing it, it's almost like you're kind of missing the point of what it does in, you know, the confluence between the animalics and the other components in the formula. You're kind of missing the point when you do that, you know what I mean? Or a weapon. Yeah. Mm. No, that's just how it was on my skin, and I'm sticking to it. Just bad news beers. That one was not feeling it. I think it should probably be time for me to wrap up here pretty soon. I'm running pretty late here, and I'm sure people are entertained by my lack of filter, but it's getting pretty late here. So I am actually, for those who are watching live and not the archive, I am back in just 2 days, less than 24 hours. I'm going to be doing the next effluvium Thursday with Fliss. Fliss Sniff Stuff on Instagram. My favorite from Les Odorants. She's a good friend, and she's going to be with me in a couple of days. It's going to be 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, New York City. So check that out. I am going to retire for the evening here and finish the rest of this, and hopefully be able to stay awake to brush my teeth. Subtlety is the key to animalics for me. Your friendly time, it will be. Yeah, it will be very nice. You won't have to stay up until the wee hours. It'll be early enough for those folks well into Europe. So it'll be a great time. Yeah, I don't think you're alone in that tactic. Thank you very much, Philippe. All right, everyone, we're going to sign off here. Hell no. I want to keep it. Thank you for introducing me to it, though. That was I loved it. I'm very grateful for those samples you sent me some time ago. You've exposed me to some really great ones. All right. Have a good night. And have a good night. All right. We're going to sign off here. Take care. Be well.